Good morning, and welcome to UN Pathways video conference series presented by Fairleigh Dickinson University in partnership with the Ambassadors Club of the United Nations. We're very pleased this morning to have as our guest Mr. Randy Rydell. Mr. Rydell is Senior Political Affairs Officer in the Office of the High Representative for Disarmament at the United Nations. He is an old friend both of the Ambassadors Club and of the UN Pathways program. We're very pleased to have him with us today. Our program participants will include Fairleigh Dickinson University, Metropolitan Campus in Teaneck, Fairleigh Dickinson University College of Florham in Madison, New Jersey, Bronx Community College, Lock Haven University, and Montclair High School. Let me just go over the ground rules for you. We are recording this event, so I would ask that you silence your cell phones and other personal electronic devices. I would also ask that each location mute their microphones except when you are speaking. The device actually will switch cameras to any site that is making noise, and we would like to avoid that during the presentation. After a brief presentation and conversation by our moderator, Ambassador Kamal of the Ambassadors Club, and Mr. Rydell, we will have ample time for questions and further discussion. What I will ask is for each site to have 2 questions ready at the end of the program, and we will proceed first from FDU Florham, then to Bronx Community College, then to Lock Haven University, then to Montclair High School, and finally to FDU Metro. 2 questions each. If time permits, we'll go for another round. And without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Ambassador Kamal and Mr. Rydell at UN headquarters.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Rydell with us as our distinguished panelist. In addition to being an old friend of FDU and one of the pillars of the Department of Disarmament, he's also a professor at Princeton University and has just returned from a professional trip on the subject of nuclear disarmament to Vienna and to Moscow. So we are really lucky to have somebody who's so completely up to date with what is happening. With his permission and with yours, let me lead into the subject myself to lay down the basic ground rules of the debate. We are trying to talk about nuclear disarmament, but we find that constantly the subject of nuclear disarmament is confused with the concept of nuclear non-proliferation, to the extent that in the public mind, the two are interconnected and, in a way, 2 sides of the same coin. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation are 2 entirely different categories of fish. Nuclear disarmament is based on the concept, the simple concept, that nuclear weapons are bad and therefore they should be eliminated. Whereas nuclear non-proliferation is based on the concept of my nuclear weapons are good, yours are bad, and therefore you must not have them, but I can keep them because I am a good man. And so the difference of approach between nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation is essentially based on 2 concepts which have to be clearly understood. The first, as I said, is whether nuclear weapons are good or bad. And we have to decide. If they are bad, everybody has to get rid of them. If they are good, then I'm afraid everybody should get them, because then why not? That's problem number 1. It is the discriminatory aspect of the difference between the 2 concepts. And the other problem is that nuclear weapons, we know cannot be used. Only one country has managed to use them on 2 occasions. And until today, 60 years later, that decision continues to be a subject of debate as to whether the use of nuclear weapons was justified or not justified in 1945. So the fact that only one country has managed to use them has subsequently led to a debate as to whether nuclear weapons can be used or not. And conventional wisdom is that nuclear weapons cannot be used. We also have a judgment by the International Court of Justice which confirms the legal aspects of this and says in 1996 that the use of nuclear weapons is incompatible with the Charter, which, as you know, is an international treaty between 192 member states. So nuclear weapons cannot be used. If they cannot be used, then what is the justification for having them? That concept is what is called deterrence. That's the second word that we have to look at. The first was discrimination, the second is deterrence. That nuclear weapons cannot be used, but they are very useful as a deterrent. But then, if they are a deterrent, then the consequences are that in that case, we should have proliferation, because the more countries who have nuclear weapons, the greater the deterrence, the more the width of the deterrence, and therefore we will have a safer world if nuclear weapons are a deterrent. And so you notice that both these ideas, the idea of discriminatoriness and the idea of deterrence, requires us to pause and reflect on the depth of intensity of each of these two words. And in order to have that debate between Mr. Rydell and myself, let us also identify that from 1945, which is when one country achieved nuclear weapon capacity, until the middle of the 1960s, the 5 permanent members of the United Nations did not talk about nuclear disarmament. They were interested, each one of them, in building up equal capacity so that not one of the 5 permanent members would have preemption or priority in nuclear weapons capacity. And so there is no talk about nuclear disarmament until 1963, when the last of the P5 achieves nuclear weapons capacity. It is then that they start talking about nuclear weapons, and their objective is not to get rid of nuclear weapons. Their objective is not nuclear disarmament, but only to prevent other states from achieving nuclear weapons capacity. And so the talk then is not about nuclear disarmament in the 1960s, but about nuclear non-proliferation. And that is what ultimately gives us the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970, a treaty which is said to be one of the cornerstones of the world, but in the opinion of many of us, is a treaty that is not worth the paper on which it is written, because it is discriminatory, because it has been challenged at least 6 times, and it has not been able to adjust to any of the challenges. And so suddenly then, out of the blue, living in a world of nuclear non-proliferation, which at least 3 major countries refuse to accept, and that is Israel, India, and Pakistan, that suddenly out of this world of nuclear non-proliferation, we get a new president in the United States, and the talk is back on track.